Outside Riverside Memorial Hospital, the night air bit with a sharp chill, urging most people homeward. Yet Elena Ward drifted out, her steps heavy, shoulders slumped under a thin jacket. An old canvas bag swayed gently at her side. She appeared every bit the weary nurse at the end of another unappreciated shift. Behind her, near the entrance, other nurses spoke freely, their voices sharp. "She acts like she's made of glass," one sneered. "Just average. Nothing special," another added. "I wouldn't let her near a scraped knee." Dr. Avery Miles emerged next, shaking his head with a showy sigh audible across the entire lot. "Honestly, how she still works here is beyond me," he sneered. "Some folks just can't handle the heat." Their cruel laughter echoed over the damp asphalt. Elena didn't flinch, didn't give them a glance. Her breath remained even, her stance surprisingly strong for someone they labeled fragile. Then a tremor ran through the very earth. A deep, violent rumble hammered the air. The sound of rotors. Clouds of dust exploded across the lot. A Blackhawk helicopter dropped between the parked cars, its bright lights cutting through the gloom. Soldiers spilled out. "Where is Lieutenant Commander Elena Ward?" A sudden hush fell. Ted Marshall pointed, shocked. "Her. But she's just a nurse." Before we continue, please subscribe to Military and Veteran Stories so you don't miss these brave tales. And share in the comments where you're watching from today. Elena Ward was 29, but many days she felt older than the hospital itself. She moved with a quiet, careful calm that made others misjudge her instantly. Her voice was gentle, steady, rarely loud. She never argued, never pushed back, never asked for praise. In a place where being loud was often confused with being good at your job, her silence made her an easy target. Avery Miles dismissed her before she could even speak. Whenever Elena softly, humbly offered a thought, he'd wave her away without looking up from his device. "We'll take care of it," he'd say. "Just stick to what you know," the other nurses would whisper as she passed. "She works like she's terrified of making a mistake," one grumbled. "Always so quiet," another said. "It's like she tries not to be here." But she was the first to volunteer for extra hours. The first to step forward when the emergency room was overflowing. The first person called when a patient needed steady hands instead of shouting commands. And she never complained, not once. Away from work, her life was even more private. A small apartment with one lamp always on. A mostly empty fridge. A bookshelf heavy with medical books and survival guides no ordinary nurse would ever bother with. Inside her canvas bag she kept one secret. A folded, worn Navy emblem, its edges frayed from years of sand and sweat. It stayed tucked between two trauma manuals. She still studied late at night, long after her shift ended. When sleep wouldn't come, she'd review old diagrams, field notes, methods few doctors even knew about. Sometimes during a frantic emergency, her past would break through. Her hands stayed perfectly still, even when everyone else was shaking. Her eyes would scan a patient in seconds, spotting injuries with impossible speed. She moved with reactions learned in places much tougher than a hospital. Co-workers called it luck. She knew better, because before this current life, before Riverside, before the cheap jacket and the silent hallways, she had carried a different identity. Lieutenant Commander Elena Ward, United States Navy. She had been part of a secret medical rescue team in Helmand Province, a mission that went wrong from the start. A mission where the night exploded, communications failed, and trapped civilians cried for help through dust and chaos. She remembered her teammates' faces, laughing before deployment, calm before the attack, brave until the very end. She remembered how slow government permission for air support cost them their lives. One man survived because of her, Captain Lucas Grant. He lived because she wouldn't leave him, because she fought against time with her bare hands, because she was ready to bleed beside him until help arrived. And later, after the reports, after the questions, after the polite greetings from men who had never seen real combat, Elena left. Not because she lacked bravery, not because she lacked skill, but because she was tired of seeing good people die while rules got in the way. She wanted a life where no one saluted her, where no one expected miracles, where no one carried the heavy burden she felt every night. So she changed her records, altered her rank, and remade herself as a regular nurse, a quiet woman hiding in plain sight. She hid because the memories hurt, because the guilt was crushing, because disappearing felt safer than risking failure again. But the truth always finds a way to reveal itself. And on the night the Blackhawk landed in the hospital parking lot, Elena Ward's carefully built invisibility began to crumble. Tension had simmered through Elena's shift, long before darkness covered the city. The emergency room hummed with its usual busy. Phones rang, monitors beeped, stretchers rushed by at a frantic pace. But beneath it all, a different kind of pressure throbbed, quiet and sharp, the kind that always appeared when Dr. Avery Miles was on duty. Elena saw the medicine tray first. A wrongly labeled vial, almost identical to the right one, sat inches from a patient's chart. The dose was dangerously incorrect, enough to cause breathing failure if given. She stepped forward without thinking, her hand closing over the vial with quiet certainty. "That's the wrong one," she said softly. Dr. Miles turned, eyebrows raised as if she'd personally insulted him. "Excuse me, you're correcting me now?" She held the vial up for him to see. "This label, look at that." He snatched it from her hand. "Stay in your lane. Interfering doesn't make you look smart." A few nurses snickered as he stormed off. "She just gets lucky sometimes," one whispered. "Luckier than she deserves," another replied. Elena said nothing. The familiar sting of memory pressed against her chest. On a battlefield, that mistake wouldn't have been lucky. It would have been deadly. Hours later, an older man was rushed in after falling at a bus stop. Confused, breathing shallowly, a weakening pulse, no clear reason why, the room burst into action. Doctors shouted orders. Nurses hurried to set up machines. In the corner, Dr. Miles struggled to understand what was wrong, flipping through the chart as if an answer would magically appear. Elena stepped to the bedside, her eyes narrowing. She recognized the pattern right away. "Check his sugar," she said quietly. Miles glared at her. "We're not guessing." But Elena had already grabbed the test kit. One prick, one reading, and the truth flashed back at her, dangerously low. "Give him dextrose now," she said. Miles froze as the patient's condition improved within seconds, his face reddening with shame before twisting into anger. "You don't get to make those calls," he snapped. "You took too long," she answered softly. The entire room fell silent. That was when Chris Nolan, quiet, watchful, new to the department, began to see her differently. His eyes lingered on her hands, how they never shook, on her breathing, always steady, on her movements, which seemed practiced from repeated action in far worse situations. Something about her didn't fit the story everyone believed. As the night went on, the cases became tougher. A young woman arrived with internal bleeding from a car crash. The team panicked. Her vital signs dropped fast, too fast for normal procedures. Elena stepped in, using a pressure method most nurses had never seen. She placed her hands with exact force, slowing the bleeding enough for surgeons to take over. The resident assisting gasped. "How did field training?" Elena said before she could stop herself. Miles overheard. His anger ripped through the room. "Field training? You're barely qualified for this floor." But no one could deny the truth. The patient lived because of her. Yet instead of thanks, Miles unleashed a storm. "You acted outside your role. You could have made it worse. You have no right to just improvise." Elena bowed her head slightly. "I'm sorry." Chris Nolan looked between them, his confusion growing. "She saved her," he said quietly. Miles snapped. "Stay out of it." Elena didn't defend herself. She never did. But inside something familiar stirred. A tightness in her chest. A change in her breathing. The faint ringing that came before gunfights. The hospital's bright lights flickered like old helicopter blades. Each insult piled on years of memories she never spoke about. When the shift finally ended, she walked down the long hallway toward the exit. Nurses leaned against counters, laughing together. One of them raised her voice high enough for Elena to hear. "She'll never be more than a nobody here." Laughter followed her all the way to the door. Rain washed across the parking lot, thin and cold. Elena stepped into it without lifting her hood, letting the water stream down her face as if cleaning away the night. She looked back at the glowing windows of the hospital, the place she had chosen to disappear into. Her fingers tightened on her canvas bag. "Never again leave someone behind," she whispered. The promise she made years ago, the one she tried to bury, rose again through the storm, and the night seemed to shift around her, as if something much bigger was already on its way. The rain came down in thin, steady lines, as Elena walked toward the bus stop at the far end of the hospital lot. The streetlights cast pale circles onto the wet ground, turning every puddle into a dull mirror. But the night was quiet in that strange way that always made her uneasy, like the world was holding its breath. She reached the small metal shelter and sat down on the cold bench. Her canvas bag slipped from her shoulder and landed on the ground with a soft thud. The flap opened as it hit, spilling some of its contents onto the slick concrete. Elena leaned forward to gather everything, but the wind suddenly gusted hard, pushing a page out into the open. A folded Navy flight log lay half visible, its edges worn from being opened and closed too many times. Next to it, a faded rescue unit patch slid halfway out. Its stitching was frayed, the colors dulled but clear to anyone who knew what they were seeing. Underneath, the corners of two thick trauma manuals showed, their pages swollen from years of use. The edges were filled with tiny cramped handwriting, field notes, quick solutions, adjustments you only learn when you have to save someone with whatever you have and nothing else. Elena froze for a second, staring at the patch. For a brief moment, she saw it not on the ground but stitched on a uniform sleeve stained with dust and blood under a desert sky. Her chest tightened, she swallowed hard, reached down and gathered everything up with careful hands. Across the lot near the edge of the sidewalk, Ted Marshall watched from his security post. He had been halfway through a lukewarm coffee when he saw her bag fall open. His eyes caught the shape of the patch before she snatched it back. He didn't recognize every detail, but he knew enough to understand that was no simple souvenir. He had served in the military as a much younger man. You never forget the look of real patches, the ones earned the hard way. Ted narrowed his eyes, watching the way Elena folded the flight log with practiced care before sliding it deep into her bag. He didn't say anything. He just lowered his coffee cup, studying her for a moment longer. There was a question in his face that he didn't voice. When Elena stood up again, she felt a sharp tug in her upper arm. She winced and lifted her hand to rub the spot just below her shoulder. The sleeve of her jacket pulled back for a second, revealing a trace of pale, jagged scar tissue. It ran like a white river against her skin, the kind of mark that spoke of shrapnel or a bad night with no help. She tugged the sleeve down quickly, more from habit than embarrassment. Scars were easier to hide than the memories behind them. She straightened her posture without thinking, her back aligned, shoulders squared, feet planted like she was standing at an unseen line in the dirt. Even waiting for a city bus, she stood too straight, too balanced, like someone who expected orders at any second. The wind shifted again, this time bringing a distant sound with it. A low, rhythmic thumping, faint at first, then clearer. Most people would have dismissed it as far-off construction or a coming storm. Elena did not. Her head tilted slightly, her eyes narrowed toward the dark sky beyond the hospital roof. Without conscious thought, she began to count in her head. Rotations per minute, distance, angle. Her breathing changed, slow and steady, as if her mind were slipping into an old, familiar map. Ted saw it, the way her body went still, then alert. The way her eyes stopped seeing the parking lot and started seeing something else entirely. He felt a familiar chill run down his spine, the kind that always came just before things went wrong. Behind them, through the large glass windows of the hospital, the emergency department glowed with harsh fluorescent light. Nurses leaned against counters, scrolling through their phones, laughing at jokes that would be forgotten by morning. A few of them still talked about Elena, about how she took too long, how she acted like she knew better, how she always seemed different. They had no idea how close they were to losing a patient earlier that night. No idea how quickly she had read the signs, how fast she had stepped in. No idea how many lives that quiet, steady woman might have already saved long before she ever set foot in Riverside Memorial. They definitely had no idea what was coming toward them now. The distant thumping grew a little stronger, then faded, then rose again as the wind shifted. Elena's grip tightened around the strap of her bag. She inhaled slowly, counting, tracking, measuring. This was not the vague rumble of a commercial plane overhead. This had a pattern she knew deep inside her. She didn't say it aloud, but she recognized it. Helicopter. Ted glanced up at the sky too, though he couldn't see anything yet. The hair on his arms stood up. Years of forgotten training whispered that nights like this never stayed quiet for long. Inside the hospital, a burst of laughter echoed down the hallway. Someone copied Dr. Miles's earlier outburst, calling her lucky, calling her out of her depth. A small group joined in, throwing out comments they would never have dared to say if they knew who she really was. Their world still felt normal, wrapped in bright lights and paperwork, untouched by rotor wash and emergency landings and decisions that couldn't wait for a meeting. Out here by the bus stop, the air felt different. Elena kept her eyes on the sky, listening to a sound that no one else could yet place. Ted watched her, watched the way her body prepared itself without moving a muscle. He didn't know the specifics, didn't know about Helmand or Captain Lucas Grant or the mission she carried like a hidden wound. But he knew one thing with sudden clarity. Whatever those sounds in the night belonged to, they were coming for someone like her. The night broke open without warning. One moment the hospital parking lot was quiet, except for the rain. The next, the sky ripped apart with a roar so powerful it shook the glass windows. A Blackhawk helicopter dropped out of the darkness like a falling storm. Its landing lights sliced through the mist, its rotors blasting wind hard enough to send trash cans tumbling and car alarms screaming. The aircraft slammed down near the ambulance bay in a violent spray of water and dust. The force hit the sliding doors so hard they rattled on their track. Nurses screamed and scattered, papers ripped from clipboards. A metal sign snapped off its post and slid across the pavement. Ted Marshall shielded his face from the debris, but he didn't move. He had seen landings like this before. Elena Ward stood perfectly still. The moment the skids touched the ground, soldiers poured out, moving with silent, practiced aggression. They didn't hesitate, didn't look around confused. They knew exactly what they were here for. Their formation was tight, their steps were together, their manner was deadly calm. At the front of them was Commander Ryan Blake, tall, broad-shouldered, eyes sharp like they were carved from something harder than stone. He scanned the area, jaw tight, rain whipping off his gear. He lifted a hand to his ear. "Find Lieutenant Commander Elena Ward now." His voice echoed off the hospital walls. Every head in the parking lot snapped toward him. Nurses froze. Paramedics tripped over their own feet. Someone dropped a coffee cup that shattered on the ground. Ted Marshall swallowed and lifted a shaking hand. "There," he said, pointing at Elena. "That's her." A few nurses gasped, backing away. They had mocked her not even an hour ago. Now they stared as if seeing her for the first time. Dr. Avery Miles burst through the hospital doors, his coat flapping wildly. "Stop, stop right there," he shouted. "You're mistaken. That woman is barely capable. She's a problem, not." Commander Blake turned slowly. Deliberately, his face hardened, anger simmering just below the surface. "Doctor," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "She created half the medical rules your hospital pretends to understand. She's saved more men than you've ever treated." Miles froze mid-step, the words hitting him like a physical blow. Behind him, nurses stared confused and scared. They looked at Elena like she was a stranger, someone dangerous, someone important. Elena's breath caught for a sec. She looked like she might break, panic rising. Memories clawing at her from the inside. Then something shifted, something deep, buried, but never truly gone. Her posture changed. Her shoulders squared, her eyes focused with cold exactness. The soft-spoken nurse vanished. The lieutenant commander returned. Commander Blake stepped closer, rain dripping from his gear onto the pavement. "Captain Lucas Grant is dying," he said, his voice softer now, but no less urgent. "He asked for you by name." Elena went absolutely still. The world shrank to that one sentence. Lucas Grant, alive, calling for her. Her mind snapped into place like a weapon locking on target. "What are his vital signs?" she demanded. A soldier medic stepped forward immediately. "Unstable, rapid internal bleeding. They can't find it. Conditions at the outpost, dust storm left over, poor visibility, power flickering. What equipment is ready for arrival?" "Basic field surgery kit, warming blankets, O-negative blood standing by." Her voice hardened. "Not enough. Prepare the emergency chest tray and high-flow saline. I want to retract, portable suction and 2 medics on manual compression duty." "Yes, ma'am." Not one operator hesitated. Not one questioned her. They moved instantly. falling into line as if she still outranked all of them, as if no time had passed, as if she had never left. The hospital staff stared, mouths open. They had never seen Elena give a command, never heard her voice speak with such clarity and control. Dr. Chris Nolan stepped beside Miles without meaning to, his eyes fixed on Elena. "Who is she?" he whispered. Miles didn't answer. He couldn't. His face was pale, his throat tight. Commander Blake glanced back at him, his expression icy cold. "You've wasted her talent," he said, "and you don't even understand what she can do." Miles started to object, his voice cracking. "This is a hospital. She's not." Blake stepped in close enough that Miles flinched. "If you say another word," he said calmly, "I will personally file a report on your neglect, your incompetence, and your blocking of a Navy priority. A medical rescue." Miles shut up immediately. Elena stepped forward, rain dripping off her jacket. Her eyes locked on the open helicopter bay. "Let's go," she said. The soldiers moved around her like she was the center of everything. Hospital staff watched in shocked silence as she walked toward the Blackhawk. Not a quiet, timid nurse anymore, but a woman whose presence changed the very air. And as she climbed into the aircraft, the question hung over every stunned observer. Who had they been working beside all this time? They were about to find out. The Blackhawk sliced through the night like a blade, its engine screaming against the wind. Inside the shaking cabin, Elena Ward braced herself with one hand on the overhead strap. The moment the doors sealed shut, her entire manner shifted again. No hesitation, no softness, no sign of the quiet nurse the hospital believed she would. "Monitor his oxygen levels every 15 seconds, she ordered, her voice sharp and steady. "If it drops below 80, I want artificial breathing immediately." A soldier medic nodded, already moving. Another handed her the vital signs tab. She scanned it with lightning speed, tapping through data like she'd never left this world. "Increase warmed saline, adjust his position, lift the right side, that bleeding is to the side. Don't wait for symptoms to prove it." Her tone carried real power, power born from sand, blood and years of combat injury medicine. She didn't sound like someone recalling. She sounded like someone stepping directly back into who she truly was. One soldier medic whispered to the other, unable to hide his awe. "She hasn't lost her edge." The other shook his head. "She never does." The chopper jolted as it landed. Dust exploded from the ground in thick clouds. Bright lights from the forward base cut through the haze as the wheels hit the landing zone. The doors flew open immediately, and hot desert air rushed. Elena jumped out first. Colonel James Reich strode toward the helicopter, shouting orders to clear the medical tent until his voice broke mid-command. His eyes locked onto her for 3 long seconds. He didn't move, didn't blink, didn't breathe. "Elena," he whispered, barely audible, then louder with disbelief in every word. "Lieutenant Commander Ward, I thought you were gone." Everything stopped. Medics froze with equipment in their hands. Soldiers halted mid-stride. Even the injured seemed to fade into the background as the weight of that name filled the air. Lieutenant Commander Ward, the name they read in after-action reports. The medic whose final message ended in static. The rescuer whose entire team died during the Helmand disaster except for one man she dragged out with her bare hands. The woman the Navy listed as missing, likely dead because the truth was too heavy, too secret, too painful to write down. Elena stood still, dust swirling around her boot. She didn't confirm it. She didn't deny it. She simply looked at Colonel Reich with the eyes of someone who had survived what others couldn't understand. Slowly, without anyone needing to say it, the understanding spread through the medical zone. Every soldier straightened. Every medic stepped back. Every serviceman stared with deep respect. She wasn't a quiet nurse pulled from a hospital. She was the sole survivor of a rescue unit the Navy had hidden under classified files. The medic legend whispered about, the ghost of Helmand they thought they'd lost. And now she was standing in the dust again, right where destiny needed her most. The medical tent shuddered as the wind outside whipped sand against the canvas walls. Bright lights flickered. The steady thump of distant explosions rattled supplies on the metal shelf. It wasn't direct shelling on the base, but close enough to make every neck inside tingle, except Elena's. She stood at the head of Captain Lucas Grant's stretcher, gloves already stained with blood, her jaw set in fierce concentration. Every heartbeat from the monitors was a countdown she refused to lose. "He's failing," a medic warned. "Not on my watch," she answered, her voice low but hard as steel. She slid her hands beneath the surgical sheets with the precision of someone who had performed this exact miracle in worse conditions. Under fire, with fewer tools, with lives depending on her alone, she directed two medics with short, sharp commands. "Pressure here, harder, don't let up, retractor now, warm saline, keep it steady, watch his breathing. If it dips, tell me before the machine does." Every movement she made was quick and exact. She knew exactly where the hidden bleeding was without needing scan, where the old scar had narrowed the tissue, where the artery was likely tearing from blunt force. Her fingers found what the base surgeons couldn't. "There," she whispered. "Clamp." The medic beside her froze for half a sec. She'd reached in blind, guided only by memory and body instinct. But he handed her the clamp anyway. She locked it down fast. The bleeding slowed, Grant's vital signs improved. Color returned to his face. A collective breath seemed to move across the room. But Elena wasn't finished. She worked through each step with the composure of someone who'd lived where hesitation meant death. Suction, seal, stitches, check, reposition. Her movements never stopped, not even when an incoming shell shook dust down from the tent beams. Outside, soldiers crouched instinctively. Inside, she didn't even flinch. When she finally stepped back, soaked in sweat, she whispered, "He's stable." Silence. Not the unsure kind. Not the confused kind. A respectful silence. One born from the realization that they had just watched something amazing. Colonel James Reich moved forward slowly, his eyes fixed on her. There was a deepness in his expression. Respect, sadness, pride, something heavier than all three. He turned to the operators gathered near the entrance. "All soldiers and support staff. Attention." The command cracked through the medical tent like a lightning bolt. Every operator straightened instantly. Boots slammed together, shoulders squared. Over 30 men and women formed a perfect line across the sand. Wind tore through the open flap, whipping sand in swirling arcs around their feet. Bright lights caught the edges of their gear, casting long shadows across the ground. Then every single one of them raised their right hand, a perfect, unified salute. It hit the earth like a second shockwave. Elena froze, her breath caught, her fingers trembled inside her glove. Soldiers saluting a civilian nurse. No, saluting a lieutenant commander who had walked through hell and returned. She stood still for a long moment, trying to steady the emotion rising in her chest. Tears filled her eyes, but none spilled, not because she fought them, but because discipline held them in place. Slowly, she lifted her hand. Her return salute was perfect, sharp, precise, filled with the weight of the lives she saved and the past she carried. For a heartbeat, nobody moved, nobody spoke. The night held its breath. The sand swirled around them. The lights hummed, and the operators held that salute as if honoring someone etched into the history of their service. It wasn't showy, it wasn't loud, it was pure silent honor, earned by a woman who never asked for recognition, never expected forgiveness, and never abandoned the people who needed her. And in that moment, Elena Ward stood not as a nurse, not as a survivor, but as the warrior she truly was. The next morning, long before the sun burned through the early fog, the Blackhawk returned to Riverside Memorial Hospital. This time it didn't arrive like a storm. It came in slow and controlled, landing on the helipad with a sense of importance instead of urgency. The thumping blade still shook the windows. But there was something different in the air. Something heavier, something sharper. The hospital wasn't ready for it. News spread fast. "They're back. Those soldiers. They're here again." Staff gathered near the lobby windows, whispering in fear and awe, as the soldiers stepped through the entrance in full uniform. No chaos, just disciplined footsteps that echoed through every hallway like judgment arriving at their door. Dr. Avery Miles didn't wait to see what would happen. The moment he spotted Commander Blake among the group, he turned pale, slipped behind the nurse's station, and disappeared into a supply closet, where he locked the door behind him. Even from across the lobby you could hear the panic in his breathing. Elena walked in behind the soldiers, dressed simply in her civilian clothes, her canvas bag hanging at her side. She looked calm, but the staff's reaction shifted instantly. People stepped aside for her, eyes lowered as if afraid to speak in front of her. The same nurses who mocked her voice, her pace, her silence, now stared like she was someone entirely beyond their understanding. Commander Ryan Blake stepped to the center of the lobby, his boots echoing sharply. He turned to her and spoke loud enough for every staff member to hear. Elena Ward saved one of my men's lives last night under conditions most surgeons couldn't work in. The Navy owes her more than it can ever repay. A stunned quiet washed through the lobby. Dr. Chris Nolan, young, unsure but honest, stepped forward. You could see the embarrassment on his face, the regret settling in his shoulders. "I owe you an apology," he said softly. "For this place. For all of us. We didn't see you. We didn't even try." Elena looked at him for a moment, not with anger or pride, but with a kind of tired kindness. "Don't apologize to me," she said. Her voice was steady, quiet, but every person around her leaned in as if the air carried her words by force. "Change how you treat the quiet ones. Some people carry whole wars in silence." Nolan swallowed hard, understanding the weight behind the sentence. With that, Elena reached into her bag and pulled out a simple resignation form. She signed it on the counter with a calm, deliberate motion. No speeches, no drama. She had given this hospital everything she had, and all they had seen was a shadow of who she really was. Now they understood the truth. She handed the paper to the administrator and turned toward the lobby doors. The soldiers instinctively formed a loose escort around her, not stiff, not ceremonial, but protective, quiet, respectful. As she stepped into the cold morning light, the hospital staff watched from behind the glass, some ashamed, some humbled, all changed because they finally understood something she had lived with alone. Quiet strength is the loudest form of courage. True rank isn't worn on a shoulder, it's earned through sacrifice, conviction, and the choices you make when no one is watching. And Elena Ward walked away carrying all of it. Not as a nurse they underestimated, but as the warrior she had always been. Some warriors never wear uniforms in public. Some heroes walk among us unnoticed, moving through crowded hallways, grocery stores and quiet neighborhoods with stories they never tell. They carry memories heavier than medals and burdens deeper than scars. They don't boast, they don't demand respect, and they don't remind the world of what they gave. But every so often, life reveals who they truly are. A single moment uncovers a lifetime of sacrifice, and the world pauses, realizing the quiet one was the strongest of them all. There are more Elena Wards out there, men and women who once stood in fire, who held the line, who saved lives in silence, and now blend into the everyday corners of our lives. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe for more military and veteran stories. These stories keep the courage alive for generations to come.